Hi, this is Mark Arnold with another episode of Fun Ideas Podcast. And on today's podcast, we have an author who has written a great book about the Disney strike. And it is right here called The Disney Revolt. And we'll be talking about this at great length. And it is Jake S. Friedman. And there he is. How are you,
Hi,
sir?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Great to see you. Hi, Mark.
Hi. So before we started on the air, I kind of said at first, I was like, our mutual friend Camden Spees was like all excited about this book and everything, and he was going to join us tonight, but then he had other pressing engagements, so I said okay. But he was all excited about the book. Even Jerry Beck, who helped you with some information, was excited about the book, and I was just like, why hasn't there been enough about the Disney strike? I don't know. um but I got a copy of the book, and because you're going to be on the show, and read through it, and I actually really liked the writing style, but I learned some stuff. So I go, okay, I guess there was something to be said about uh, the Disney strike of 1941. And, there's always seemingly something else to learn about Disney. So I guess the first question would just be, what inspired you to write about the Disney strike?
Well, the short answer is John Culhane.
Mm,
John Culhane, he was one of the forefathers of animation history. And he wrote one of my favorite books when I was a kid called The Art of Aladdin, The Making of Aladdin, an
hmm.
animated film. And he was my teacher of animation history at NYU.
Ooh, cool.
Yeah, and I adored him and I adored his course so much. And after I graduated, um, I took his class three times, once for credit and then two more times just to be in his presence.
I hope it wasn't because you're flunking it.
No,
No,
I was
no.
not flunking. No, he was so exuberant. It was hard to get anything less than an A in his class.
Hmm.
He loved life. He loved animation. He was just a big kid. He was at the time when I knew him, he was in his 60s.
Hmm.
But he was really like a child in the body of a 60-year-old. He just loved the childlike whimsy of Disney and of animation. And I just loved that energy and I had to be around it. And so
Hmm.
after I graduated, and I was already an animation history buff, armchair buff up to that point. But
Hmm.
after I graduated, a couple of years later, around 2007 or 2008, he handed me this project. He said, "You're going to write the story of Art Babbitt and the Disney strike." Art Babbitt being the guy who led the strike.
Hmm.
And I was like, "What? How? When? Who?" I was totally disoriented.
Uh,
But he believed in me, and he got me in touch with Art Babbitt's widow.
hmm.
And it was she who wanted this book written to sort of cement her late husband's legacy, because she feared accurately that his name was kind of being stripped from Disney history and animation history. So she wanted him to be remembered.
Hmm.
And John said, and she knew John, and John said, "I know just the guy." And at the time, I was like 27,
Uh-huh.
and I had written zero books. I'd written some articles for Animation Magazine, and that was it, and like my local newsletter.
Hmm.
And that started a long, long journey of me
Hmm.
visiting Barbara at her house, which was once Art Babbitt's house, and digging through his personal artifacts and his files, and going through different archives and different records across the country, and finding people who had some personal relics of their own who were supportive in this project. And from that day of John telling me I was going to write this book until the day it was published was a span of 14 years.
14
So
years. Wow.
14 years. Yeah. I wasn't on the project every one of those years, but it was
Yeah.
always on the back burner in various stages of effort.
Yeah.
And it took a while to even get a publisher.
Hmm.
It took once I landed an agent. The original scope of the book was just the strike. No, excuse me. It was Babbitt's life, birth to death.
Hmm.
But no publisher wanted to buy that. They're like, right? They were like, no one's going to read it.
Yeah.
No, maybe 20 people will read a book about just Art Babbitt.
Right.
So I had to sort of like reinvent the idea and scrap some chapters and write some new chapters and sort of psychoanalyze Walt Disney a little bit and figure out how Walt and art were like this at the beginning and then were ripped apart by their politics and nearly
Right.
broke the studio.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I didn't sense that it was supposed to be an Art Babbitt biography because you kind of went through Walt Disney's life equally, at least up front, and so, obviously I knew it was about the strike. So it's like it's interesting because I did learn quite a bit about Art Babbitt that I didn't know. Um, Years ago, I'll say this, just my introduction to the whole thing, strangely enough, was I grew up in California, and in San Francisco there's a radio host named Alex Bennett, and
Mm,
he used to have stand-up comedians on the show, and this is like in the 90s before Howard Stern kind of took over the airwaves nationwide. So he was like the original. But he used to have Art Babbitt's daughter on the show, who was a stand-up comedian. I don't know if you talked to her in the course of doing that, but she used to reveal little bits of information and everything like that. But they couldn't get terribly in depth, even though um, the host was very, you know, interested in the subject. He had to keep moving on and, going back to playing music and other things. So he couldn't just talk about it exclusively. But, it is where I first learned some names and everything and stuff like that.
mm.
But
Yeah, that
we're,
that would be Karen Babbitt,
yeah, yeah.
Karin.
I couldn't remember her first name because it's been
Yeah.
30 years anyway. But, the thing that I learned, and I'll try to go through all my notes here because I wrote copious notes here, but doesn't mean I will remember what I read. um, the thing I liked the best about it is it kind of goes into the detail of why the union was important and what the union was about. And also it kind of explained, because I always had this kind of thought about the Disney strike and everything. It's like, well, how necessary was it for I mean, if they didn't want to work a particular day, couldn't they just stay home? But maybe it wasn't that easy. And maybe working at Disney was a little more grueling than I originally thought. And if you don't get any benefits, I guess you have to work, even if you don't want to, things like that. Um, but it seems like you explained it also as why let's see, what is it called? The Screen Cartoonist Guild was the
Mhm.
one that was the important union versus, say, any of the other, uh, you know, entertainment related unions, which you did list a bunch of them. Of course, the obvious one like the Screen Actors Guild and
Right.
everything like that. Um, Now, in doing your research, did you find everything from just talking to the Babbitts, or was it going through like well, tell me your process, I guess.
Okay.
Let's go like that.
Okay. Well, the strike is such a contentious issue,
Yeah.
even today,
Mhm.
even with just fans, and people who want to say that they know everything about Walt Disney and think that he's either a saint or a villain, and he's just a human. I mean, for goodness sake,
Mhm.
let the guy be human. That I wanted to really use sources that were close to the time of the strike. I didn't want to really go and use interviews from people who were remembering the strike after decades of feeling, through a colored lens that
Mhm.
shapes their perception of what had happened all those years ago. I wanted to go through documents from that time. So there were like three pillars of research materials that I came across. One was Babbitt's personal records in his home.
Mhm.
Another was in San Francisco. There's a circuit, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It had the 1,500-page court document,
Wow.
including of when Babbitt, through the union, sued the Disney company,
Mhm.
specifically Walt. He sued Walt. It had every page of the court transcript. It had every shred of evidence. So that was extremely helpful. That was just a few months after the strike, about like maybe 11 months after the strike. And the third pillar was the CSU, Northridge Oviatt Library,
Hmm.
which is a university in Southern California that has a huge collection of labor materials. And
Hmm.
someone involved with the strike, I think it was Pepe Ruiz, who was an MGM artist and he was Bill Littlejohn's right hand man. Bill Littlejohn was the head of the union, head of the Screen Cartoonist Guild. I think he donated all of his materials. And I say I think it was him because his name was on an envelope in the collection. So we're talking about like flyers and bulletins and everything that was like a day by day account of what was happening before the strike and during the strike. Like memos that were posted on the bulletin board at the Disney studio before the strike, copies of Walt's speech that he gave or speeches that he gave.
Hmm.
Anything that was handed out to the employees, this
Hmm.
guy saved, somehow he saved or collected from other Disney artists
Hmm.
and donated to this collection. I mean, there were such cool rarities like the songs the strikers sang, parody songs and sketches that they drew,
Hmm.
some of which have been seen before, but most of the materials in there have not.
No, they have
So,
not. That's why I was like amazed at the thoroughness of all this. Um, was the Disney Archives itself any help, or are they kind of hush hush about all this type of stuff at this point?
well, I reached out to them. I was above board and I sent them my manuscript upon their request, the whole thing,
Hmm.
page one to page finality page. Every single page. I wanted some IP. I wanted the permission to put a picture of Goofy, since
Hmm.
Art Babbitt like basically was the father of Goofy. And
Hmm.
maybe like the Wicked Queen or some other main characters that Babbitt was the lead animator, supervising animator for.
Hmm.
They were very insistent they wanted to see what I was doing.
Hmm.
So I said, okay, here's what I'm doing. I'm not making Walt a villain. Here's every page of my book. And I didn't hear back from them. They were very, very quick to respond when they wanted something from me. And once I gave it to them, I didn't hear anything back. So they didn't help, nor did they hinder. Um,
That's good. What
I
types of things did they ask about it or ask you besides reading it?
um, they asked me. I got some images. It wasn't really an extensive dialogue. There were some images that I wanted high res images of, um, model sheets that
Mm.
had Babbitt's name on it,
Yeah.
like for Moving Day or things like that. The short, the Mickey Donald Goofy short called
Right.
Moving Day. And they and I sent them like an image that I found online and they said, where did you get this image? I was like, just from a website some person posted. I don't know. This is the internet. And I say, how about this picture of Geppetto that's in the Disney family museum? Because there's a sketch, a very rough sketch of Geppetto that I'm sure, even though it's not signed, I really had to know Art Babbitt's drawing style. I'm sure it's by Art Babbitt. And I wanted to have that in the book. And they're like, where did you get this picture? I said, I photographed it during one of my visits at the family museum. I was like, how about this? This is of a non-Disney character. This is of a political cartoon Walt did when he was 19 years old of Baby New Year
Uh-huh.
closing the door or about to open the door of 1920, the year 1920, and what's waiting for him as Walt drew it are ominously written strikes and coal strike and rail strike and how about this? Can I have this? It's not of a Disney character. They're like, where did you get this? I'm like, I photographed it in the museum. So the people at the Walt Disney Family Museum were very nice, but they said we can't act independently of the company. The company needs to give their okay before we do anything, even before we carry anything in our gift shop,
Mm.
even before we put anything on display. The company needs to okay it.
Mm.
But the people at the museum are so nice and so supportive. But their hands are tied by the company. I hope that in my book I was able to clear up some mythos that have been perpetuated by detractors of Walt Disney because people are so quick to call him so many names and I don't think
Mm.
he's any of those things except just
Yeah.
and traumatized by his own experiences during his youth.
Yeah.
That's all.
And it it sounds like it would be in his own best interest not to unionize, at least initially, because if you don't prove a financial reason to do it, which is probably what motivated him in this case, then why do it? I found it interesting. Let's see. At one point, you said of the six studios in Hollywood, only two had joined the union right away, or at least were joined before Disney joined or anything like that. Uh, it goes into that a little bit, but it's like, was there the same type of resistance and hesitation from the other studios, or was Walt kind of like the odd man out? And,
By
or
the time the strike happened, all five other studios had joined the union,
okay,
had accepted the union. The first one was MGM, which
hmm,
is a big deal because it's a
right,
big film studio and they had a very successful shorts department, cartoon shorts department.
hmm,
Um, and the others just followed suit one by one. And they
hmm,
were of various sizes, the animation studios. George Powell, which
hmm,
some listeners or viewers may not even know, did like stop motion shorts out of wood.
right, hmm,
Um, and then there was Universal, and then there was Paramount, uh, which were responsible for um, Universal was uh, they kind of like picked up the Fleischer properties,
hmm.
and Paramount did
Well,
uh, the.
well,
I'm sorry,
Paramount. If
I'm
Paramount
going
picked out the
backwards. I'm going
Fleischer,
backwards.
yeah, yeah,
Paramount
yeah,
picked up the Fleischer, and Universal was like the Lance Studio, which is like Woody
right, correct,
Woodpecker
yeah,
and Andy Panda.
yeah,
Yeah, we'll mix them up. And then shortly before the strike, like days before the strike, Leon Schlesinger signed with the union. So
hmm,
he was doing Porky Pig and a character that would become Daffy Duck and a character that would become
hmm,
Bugs Bunny.
okay,
Um, and so he was hesitant, but he wasn't really anti-union. He just kind of for the same reasons Walt kind of stood off. He wanted to maintain power, and he was interested in just like maintaining control. People at the Lance studio had a parallel experience at Disney because there was like an in-company union, which is not legal. It's not legal to have like a bogus management-led union. And there were people who loved
yeah,
Lance, and Lance's management were like, "We will lead this union." And then that didn't last very long before the bona fide union, the independent union, came in and
hmm,
abolished them, and everyone was just happy go like that's fine.
right,
Um, so those five studios all had their union. The animators, as a craft, were the last craft to be unionized in Hollywood.
hmm,
So the Disney studio was the last studio. The animators were the last craft. The Disney animators were like the last group in Hollywood who had not been signed on for an independent union yet.
hmm,
And they just wanted, at first, their first initial reason was like they wanted to be like everyone else. They wanted to block any like mafia led
hmm,
attempts to organize. They wanted to be led by this like clean independent union that was led by Bill Littlejohn over at MGM. Um, and and um, and at first the company was like, yeah, okay. And then when the unionists wanted to negotiate, the company was like, no, we're not going to negotiate. And Art Babbitt was the leader of this effort, and he felt like a stool pigeon, like he was used by the company. So he decided to take matters into his own hands. I spent the first few chapters of the book describing how Walt became Walt and how Art Babbitt became Art Babbitt, so we can really see like why they stood so strongly in their convictions like they did.
right. Was there ever a time, because I don't think he ever did. Is there ever a time that Art Babbitt ever considered like running his own studio or anything like that? Or um,
Ever
did,
in his life,
yeah.
he co-owned a studio with a few people. That was Quartet Films.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah. No,
uh,
they did mostly commercials,
oh,
animated
okay.
commercials.
Yeah.
Later on, way down the line,
Yeah. Yeah.
50s,
Because
60s.
yeah, I mean, I'm doing a book now called TV Cartoon, and this is with Jerry Beck's blessing too, uh,
Oh,
called TV Cartoons A Time Forgot. But I'm not really covering all the commercial studios because, geez, there's a zillion of them. But it may creep into the narrative somehow because there's a lot of them in that regard. But
No.
I'm trying to cover the studios that may have had like one hit or two hits, like Linus the Lionhearted or Calvin and the Colonel, that type of stuff. And it's mainly TV cartoons. But anyway, that's off
Okay.
topic. Anyway, um,
If you end up doing Last of the Red Hot Dragons by the
mm,
Seamus Culhane studio, John Culhane voiced the dragon
mm,
in
okay,
that TV cartoon.
okay,
Just fun fact. By the
very
way,
cool.
here's Art Babbitt. Well, there he is holding a picket sign
Yay.
for your YouTube viewers. This was during the premiere of The Reluctant Dragon,
Hmm.
the LA premiere, where all the Disney artists dressed up in their black ties and gowns and were driven up, chauffeured by other Disney artists,
Hmm.
and dressed like for a premiere. And instead of entering the theater, they picketed outside the theater in their black ties and gowns, holding these picket signs
Yeah.
for the LA premiere of The Reluctant Dragon.
I always thought it was interesting or funny that this particular strike had like the best looking picket signs ever because everybody was an artist, and so they used the characters and things like that.
Oh yeah,
You know.
yeah, 100%.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't know also is that how long the strike lasted. I probably
Mhm.
have read it before, but I mean, since you went through it like step by step, like when the strike kind of started. What I think I wrote down May 28th, 1941,
Mhm.
and then they started negotiating about 5 weeks into it, and the strikers at the Reluctant Dragon, which you're showing, that was July 4th, 1941, and
Mhm.
the end of the strike, you put July 30th, and then they had a union contract by August 2nd.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't
Yeah.
realize it had gone that long, which, some people might argue that's not very long at all. But, well, when you're relying on people to animate your work, June, July, August, 3 or 4 months, that's, quite a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Most of their books about the strike erroneously say 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And
And I think I
that's
believe that. And that's probably why I had the initial thought is this is so quick, it's almost a blip on the radar. Is this even worth talking about? But no,
yeah,
it
yeah,
was more
nine
in
weeks.
depth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like a whole summer. These people are going out from May until they finally went in at the start of August. I mean,
Hmm.
you have your whole summer when you plan to get paid and you're not. So instead of receiving their paychecks, all of these artists are just picketing for a union.
Hmm.
They were risking a lot. They really wanted to change the studio for the better, and they were putting themselves in the hot seat to do so.
Hmm.
It was very close. The number of strikers just barely outnumbered the people who stayed in.
Hmm. You mean the people that just
Did not go
crossed the
out.
line and still went
Yeah.
to work? Is that what you're talking about? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now let's do some hypotheticals, and I think you did talk about a little bit in the book. What if Disney was the evil tyrant that everybody makes him out to be, and when everybody went on strike, he just would just fire everybody, and that would have been the end of it.
Oh,
How do you how
that
was
that's
that
illegal.
possible? Yeah, I was
No,
gonna say.
that's
And
illegal. That's illegal. Thanks to something that at the time was
yeah,
relatively new,
yeah,
um, called the National Labor Relations Act, and there were
yeah.
basically five tenets to
Mm,
it, and one of them was you can't discriminate for union activity. So if you fire someone for going out on strike, you're breaking the law.
mhm.
Relatively new, 1933, I think the
Yeah,
National
yeah.
Labor Relations Act came about
I
under
think you talk
Roosevelt.
about that. I wrote that down here. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
And so, obviously that wasn't. Um, w- did do you feel that there is really no alternative to what ultimately happened? That the union had to be joined, and there wouldn't have been any other possible outcome in doing your research, or did you think, why did they do that? They should have done this or something like that. um,
Oh,
when you're doing your research.
well, I think, strikes are called a lot, mostly empty threats.
Hmm.
Um, and they're often resolved very quickly, at least at the time. There are some standout strikes in Hollywood, but if you sit down and read those variety newspapers like I did, you'll see that people are calling strikes all the time. There was a strike called at Disney like a month before the actual strike was called, and that's in the book too.
Mhm.
So I think the strikers, before they were strikers, I think the pro union artists just felt dragged around, pulled
Yeah.
around by the studio. They felt taken advantage of. They felt like they were discriminated against already because so many of them had already been fired, versus the ones that were not going to the union meetings. They saw the coercion that the management was doing to try and get artists, the young artists, the up and comers who were working at Disney to not join the union.
Mhm.
And they just didn't like it, just got uglier and uglier over time.
Yeah.
So I think this was just like an emotional eruption,
Right.
as well as strategic. Um,
So it seems to be that like it was inevitable, even if, the only thing that would have varied is maybe the duration of the strike, depending on what they did. That's what I
Maybe.
kind of get out of it. That there's no other way around it, especially if all the other studios joined in and uh, joined the union. If they didn't join immediately, they joined eventually, and so it kind of gave the union more power and stuff like that. So.
Well, in one of the meetings that the Disney artists had before this, like 5 months before the strike, they
Mhm.
say that Walt is just oblivious of the turning tide that's happening in
Mhm.
Hollywood.
Mhm.
The social change, like he's not recognizing what's happening. Um, and I think there were two main folks over at the Disney studio who were basically egging Walt on
Mhm.
to stand strong against any sort of union activity. And one was his vice president, who he trusted a great deal, who I write about a lot in this book. And the other was the head of the HR department, named Hal Adelquist.
Mhm.
He called himself the personnel director. He
Mhm.
basically knew everyone on the creative side of the studio and most of management. Like he had come up from the lowest ranks to be like the assistant director of Snow White and then head of personnel. And he like it was he who decided who got what assignments. And whenever any of the loyal artists saw a pro union artist walk into a union meeting, they reported it to Hal Adelquist, the
Mm.
the the personnel director. So that's not very nice, I don't think. This little witch hunt that's going on. And as far as the vice president egging Walt on, like he's kind of like pushing Walt to consider that everything is communist led and to fear communism. And he has his own like nefarious reasons for doing that too.
Right. Like you mentioned the book, and I guess I probably have read this before, but it didn't register is that Disney's own father, Elias, was a communist. Yeah,
Socialist.
socialist. Oh, okay. But I thought you said communist too. I wrote down communist, but on my notes. But anyway, but socialist.
Socialist.
Still, there's like similarity in some regard to that in a certain way. It's like uh, did that uh, alter or affect Walt's view on unions and things like that? Was he, severely anti-union or,
Well,
yeah,
I, I sort of paint a picture of young Walt growing up,
yeah,
seeing his dad as a member of the Socialist Party. That's kind of the difference, I would say, between the
yeah,
communism idea and socialism, is that the Socialist Party was much more widely accepted at the
hmm,
turn of the century, the prior century, and lots of folks of Walt's generation, or their fathers rather, were members of the Socialist Party, which was led by Eugene Debs,
hmm,
particularly because Eugene Debs was anti-World War One. He said, "There's no reason for the U.S. to join this war. Lots of people are going to be killed. It's something that, and all the people who are going to be sent in are going to be like poor people. Why
hmm,
is it going to be waged by the rich and fought by the poor?"
hmm,
And the president at the time Woodrow Wilson made it illegal to protest the war,
Mm.
which I also don't think is very nice either. So Eugene Debs went to jail for protesting the war,
Mhm.
which is, I don't know, pretty cool. That's a pretty cool thing to do, fighting for his free speech. So a lot
Mhm.
of people were behind Eugene Debs and
Mhm.
socialism, and Walt's dad was one of them.
Mhm.
Walt, in his way, joined the war effort, knowing his dad was a member of this party, a follower of Eugene Debs.
Mhm.
And Walt, fixed his application so as to lie about his age so he could become an ambulance driver over in France
Mhm.
after the armistice, which for him was a lot of fun. Um, so it seems like on one hand, Walt was, yes, raging against his dad because his dad was this taskmaster
Yeah.
who made him do this paper route that caused him to, I don't know, as he would say, have nightmares into his adulthood, you know, panic, wake up in the middle of the night thinking he has to wake up for the paper route of his youth. But also, he loved his dad, and he saw that his dad had been taking advantage of other socialist pyramid schemes.
Yeah.
Um, so there's both those things going on, and neither of them paint socialism in a in an appetizing way for Walt Disney.
No.
But I found, yeah, I was able to find some stuff about Walt that had never been in print before, about Walt's early years, piecing together things that he had just mentioned in interviews and digging deeper into that and realizing and learning that, oh, this is the cartoon, the socialist cartoon that he used to draw from his dad's newspaper. Oh, this is the um the farm collective that his dad was a part of, which was widely considered to be a pyramid scheme that took advantage of gullible farmers like Walt's dad.
Yeah.
You know, I was like, oh, this paints a much fuller picture of how Walt viewed his own dad.
Mhm. And it's just interesting in reading about all that. It's like, and then probably just a decade later, then he has to kind of go through a different situation with the Red Scare and communism and socialism again with the McCarthy uh, witch hunt there. And it's like, I know these two aren't related, but I mean, I'm sure it's crossed his mind. Here we go again. But, another situation that would
Well,
affect his company, at
yeah,
least.
yeah, that's a well, if you're talking about the Red Scare, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, that starts now. Actually, in the political cartoon that he drew,
Hmm.
a few on the cusp of 1920, one of the fears, the turmoil that's busting through the door that Baby New Year is has yet to open is the word Reds. Reds are an impending threat for
Hmm.
Walt Disney. Um, and that just kind of grew. That that threat of Reds kind of grew until it did become the Red Scare, after really kind of a little during the strike. It really started taking off then,
Yeah.
and the conservative newspapers were talking about the communist threat. It was just fear mongering, like
Yeah.
nothing ended up happening. We call it, now we know that it's the McCarthy witch hunt. Now we can read Arthur Miller's play The Crucible and see that it's just a commentary on a corrupt system.
Yeah.
But at the time people were genuinely scared.
Yeah. The part that upsets me is just people that were totally blacklisted for no real reason other than, you know, claiming a belief. And sometimes they weren't even claiming a belief. They were just somebody uh, read off their name for, list some people that are communists or a socialist or whatever. And then suddenly you're tagged, and the only way you can get out of it is name some other people, and it's like big domino effect. It's kind of a weird thing, but anyway.
Yeah, yeah, very unfortunate.
Um, Now, the Screen Cartoonist Guild was obviously the union. The most of the strikers were there. You mentioned a lot of different unions. Was there a need or a reason for any of these animators to join other unions, or was just that one the one that would suffice for most people doing the standard animation jobs of, say, even writing, scripting, storyboarding, in betweening, ink and paint, and all that. It would cover all those various positions, or would somebody have a need to join other unions as well, or in place of that?
Well, if you were what they called a screen cartoonist,
Yeah,
or someone who's making any sort of art for animation, then you would join the Screen Cartoonist Guild. That was the clean union that the mafia were
right.
not touching.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, there was the IATSE, which was
Yeah,
mafia led, and I talk about the guy who was
yep.
leading that and
Talked about that.
trying,
Yeah.
yeah, this guy Willie Byoff, who came straight from Chicago and now is trying to bring in as many people under him, sign up as many crafts workers in Hollywood as he can, so he can blackmail studio heads and threaten to take their workers out on strike if they don't pay him what became $550,000. This is back in like 1939.
Right.
$550,000 in 1939 went pretty far.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Yes. So this mafia guy is profiled in the book too. He's a villain.
Yeah.
He's a villain. He, the vice
Yeah.
president,
Definitely. Yeah.
Walt Disney, not the villain.
Right. Yeah. Um. So obviously that was resolved. Was just the Screen Cartoonist Guild becoming more powerful? Was that really the catalyst that kind of bumped this other situation out of there, or is it more difficult than that?
Oh,
Uh,
you mean that got the Willie Byoff out of the
yeah, yeah,
picture?
yeah.
Oh well, um, I talk about it uh, in the last third of the book. What happened to Willie Byoff? Right,
Hmm.
that he I mean, I don't want to spoil anything for the
Okay, all right.
readers,
Well, leave it for
but
the readers. I just got.
yeah.
I know it's in the book, but anyway.
Yeah. But
Okay.
basically what caught up with him was the same thing that caught up to Al Capone, his mentor, his
Got it.
unofficial
Okay.
mentor.
Okay, that's fair enough. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to see where we were at here. One of the things that I found fascinating, and I'm sure it was listed somewhere, easily accessible, considering where you got your, documents and everything, was just the list of everyone who was working at the studio, and then the people that went on strike versus not going on strike, and then the people that you described, the people that uh, were laid off. I forgot the amount of time within, like, 3 years or something like that, because I know they weren't supposed to fire any of the striking workers once they went back to work. But you know, even Babbitt got laid off and came back, and it never was the same. And then he went on to do other things. So I mean,
Mhm.
was it really ever the same for the people that went on strike? Uh, I mean, it's got to be an awkward situation, no matter how long of time has passed. That you're on strike against the company you want to work at, and then you come back, and it's like, well, I get to work here now, but is everybody like looking at me because I went out on strike last year or 3 years ago or 5 years ago?
Oh
So
my God. Yeah, you're
yeah,
you're hitting the nail on the head. So this is I don't really write about this in the book.
right.
My editor had to he asked me to trim down as many pages as could fit in this book. So the thing that happened post strike, I just sort of like had to fast forward through what happened
Right.
after the strike.
And so
Um,
did you get any information on that? I mean, I know it's not in the book, but I'm just kind of curious about it.
yeah, sure. Yeah, the energy was different, and I think I kind of hinted
Mm,
that like it just wasn't the same. Friendships were broken forever. People who were friends before the strike, who were on different sides of the fight, ended up not talking to each other, even if they're working together. Those who went out um, and then resumed working at the studio didn't really socialize with the people who were loyal and didn't leave during the strike. It was like two different camps.
mm,
Um, and it was like a very like the energy was torn. In addition to that, a lot of the like benefits that Walt thought that his artists would love, like they had like a like a coffee shop, and they had an auto shop on the lot, and they had all of these cool things. It was kind of like the Google company, like people talk about all the
Yeah, yeah.
great things of Google. So like there was something like that kind of energy. Well, all of those luxuries were kind of cut, and there were like
Mhm.
after that the energy changed. There were people monitoring time, and there were people who were monitoring uh, how what costs were spent where.
Mhm.
It was also like this was also the beginning of World War II.
Mhm.
So the studio was already hurting financially, and there was a lot that they were trying to juggle during
Yeah.
this very complicated time.
Mhm.
I mean, they were dog paddling. They were barely staying afloat.
Now, this next question is obviously hypothetical, but let's say the strike went through and it got resolved, and there was no World War II directly after it, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you think Disney would have become a stronger company, a weaker company, or stayed about the same if that didn't happen? The World War
Stronger,
II.
stronger, way stronger. World War II and the rest of the 40s, it was kind of like a tiny little dark ages for the
Yeah,
Disney studio. Not that I have anything against the package films that they did,
yeah,
but it was like they weren't like the kind of Disney masterpieces that the audience wanted.
right.
So if not for World War II, and World War II hurt Pinocchio's box office
Yeah,
returns, hurt Fantasia's box office
yeah.
returns, but
But
it's
this,
also the reason why Dumbo exists. Like
right.
that's one of my favorite films,
Hmm.
Dumbo. Perfect
But
storytelling.
also for World War II, I mean, the government, gave out money to do like special training films and stuff like that, not just for Disney, but Warner's and the other studios and things like that. So, I mean, did that help ease the pain, or was it still kind of like, not enough? I guess Disney survived, so I guess that's the ultimate answer because it's still around now after 100 years. But it's like it's just always the hypothetical, how much damage did this strike do? But you're saying basically it was for the best, and World War II probably wasn't the biggest help at the time. Is that what I'm getting at?
World
Yeah.
War II, yeah, it was the presence of World War II goes hand in hand with the company just like hurting for finances, and the reason why a lot of the artists wanted a union,
Hmm.
and one of the big reasons was spontaneous layoffs that were happening. They didn't feel
Hmm.
like they had any job security, and they didn't know who to complain to. They just had no collective bargaining. They wanted it to have a grievance committee. They wanted to have someone who could speak on behalf of the workers. That's
Hmm.
all they wanted.
Hmm.
Someone who could represent the workers. That's what
Hmm.
collective bargaining is, right? So
Hmm.
people were being fired or laid off left and right. The company was hurting because of the war in Europe, cutting off all this revenue.
Hmm.
They didn't know how much the company was hurting. They were sitting in this big, fancy, shiny new studio in Burbank
Right.
that they just moved into, which was a very questionable financial move for Walt to
Yeah.
do at that particular time. He was very confident after Snow White and did not think about world events. He could have picked up the newspaper. Hitler was doing his thing in 1938. He didn't
Right.
have to. Walt did not have to buy this lot in
Yeah.
Burbank.
But Walt is always known to do that. I think the only time in his lifetime that Disney Studio ever really showed a profit was right after Mary Poppins, and it's probably because he didn't have a chance to spend it all. So, had he lived, it probably would have been spent, and Disney World would have been in the red. But Roy kept it in the black. But anyway, that's a later story for a later time. But anyway, a couple more questions about just how the strike changed things or whatever. Obviously, the Screen Cartoonist Guild is still in effect today, and
Mhm.
pretty much, I would think every major studio that has popped up since just automatically unionized. Of course, in the beginning research for my um, book that I mentioned, the TV cartoons thing, I found there was a couple TV cartoon studios in the 50s that were trying to get out of doing it, but then they got their hands slapped pretty hard. So,
Mm.
TV spots being one of them, which made the original, not the original, the later Crusader Rabbit cartoons in the late 50s and
Ah,
things like that. That's the things I'm
ah.
starting to find out. So, um, the upshot of my question is basically it seems like it's still strong, still useful today for studios. And does Disney have any, as a company, have any regrets, or are they strong union supporters today?
Well, I don't represent the company.
Yeah, but
Uh,
you were talking with them. I didn't know if you had a chance to ask them about how it's affected. If you didn't, that's fine too. So.
well, I can say that ever since the Disney strike, and here's another cool picture, by the way. Well, this was early on in the strike. There's Art Babbitt
Okay.
right there
Hmm.
with his very attractive, fashionable wide collar, and one of my favorite picket signs, Pinocchio saying, "There are
No
no strings
strings
on
on
me."
me.
Um, I After the strike, the studio became a union shop, and it has been a union shop every day of its existence to today.
Hmm.
The animators, the artists who make the Disney animation.
Hmm.
Um, since that time, of course, the company has expanded into all these other things like the parks and um, TV and etc. So there are other facets of the company that are not unionized. And if you want to hear about the perspective from the inside, like you're asking, Abigail Disney has a new documentary out. New, it's like a few months old now, um, about her experience with her dad, with her, yeah, her dad Roy and her grandfather Roy Senior, and her experience talking to people who work at the parks and wanting less of an income gap between the highest paid earners and the lowest paid earners. Uh, and she fights against wage discrepancy, and she's been talking about that for a bit. But this cool documentary, I mean, I don't know her personally, I've never met her, but I'll plug her thing anyway.
Okay. What's the name of it? Or do you know
What is the name of it? Let's get the What is
well,
the name of it? Well, let me tell you what the name of it
well, while you're
is.
looking it up, I will mention this is like, I don't know if there's similarities, but Disney has their own cruise lines, and a lot of times there's issues with cruise lines about registering them in other countries other than the US to try to avoid unionization there. So
Oh,
does
interesting.
and I think there's been blocking of unions even for the parks like you're talking about
The
in at
documentary is
times.
called The American Dream and Other
American
Fairy Tales
Okay.
that by Abigail
So
Disney.
does
Yeah.
Disney as a company encounter this all the time with every time they branch into new areas of entertainment? It seems likely, but maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's just my impression.
I don't know.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't
I'm
know.
just I'm venturing off topic here, just kind of curious about, because the one thing that just was like really fascinating overall is, like I said, you went into so much depth about how unions work and what unions did and what the different
Mhm.
ones in the entertainment business did. Um, I assume, we were talking mainly about the Hollywood studios. Did this also apply to the New York studios? There were still a few like Terry Tunes and a couple. Did they unionize too, or did you find out?
Yeah, Fleischer had a strike first,
Hmm.
um, and the strikers won that,
Okay.
and that's a whole different story. But
Yeah, I know, because you don't really cover it. So I was curious. You must have come across something in your research and
oh yeah, I
about the New
mean,
York studios and things like that. I guess
yeah.
Fleischer was in Miami, but still, they started in New York.
Well, they moved
Yeah.
tonight to
Yeah.
Miami basically because it was in the aftermath of the strike. Like it gave them a chance to go. So it's like, yeah, to go with non-union workers again, if I
Hmm.
understand correctly. Once they
Hmm.
moved to Miami, immediately after the strike, the Fleischer strike, which is where they produced Gulliver down in Miami.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't want to, like, and I hope I succeeded. I didn't want to overload the reader with too many black and white details about how unions work or like
Yeah.
union history. I just kind of wanted to pepper it here and there
Yeah.
to give the reader an idea that this was going on in the world and this is what people are experiencing in 1930,
Yeah.
1935.
And of course,
Um,
me as reading the book, I'm like, I have questions now because I've read the book, but that's okay. Sometimes you might have a quick answer, sometimes not. Um,
Oh yeah, the actual text of the book is only 250 pages.
yeah,
It's not an encyclopedia. It doesn't go through like
yeah.
my own personal research fills shelves,
Wow.
because I got into every nook and cranny of everything, and all of
Yeah,
that was boiled into just the
yeah.
story of how Art Babbitt and Walt Disney
Hmm.
had this thing, and then it broke apart. And only the last third of the book is about the strike itself. Everything else is about the golden age of Disney, how everyone teamed up to create Snow White. Everyone's in the same boat
Yeah,
for the first half of the book. And then immediately after Snow White, feelings start to change. It
yeah.
becomes more of a commercial
Hmm.
endeavor, and
Hmm.
Walt's eyes are turning into dollar signs a little bit.
You think anything to do with, Pinocchio, he pretty much scrapped everything that they did uh after they got it all started. Um
Everything, no,
yeah,
just a few months of work,
yeah, but I mean it was enough.
just a
Do
few
you
months.
think that
Pinocchio.
created a little dissent and, kind of spurred it on, or it didn't have anything to do with it, or it just didn't help? Yeah. Um d-
Oh well, it didn't help the finances of the company. It always hurts morale when someone animates something and
yeah,
that animation isn't used.
right.
Um, Ward Kimball said that it was like getting smacked in the face with a cream pie when he
Yeah.
animated one of the dwarf scenes that was cut
Yeah,
from
well,
the
yeah, I
film.
was gonna say they even had that in Snow White. They had the soup eating sequence that they cut out, which
Yeah.
to this day I think that they should finish and stick it in the film. Because that's me, because it's fully animated. Why not, ink it and put it in there? Paint it. Maybe they will for the 100th anniversary of the movie. Who knows? Anyway, I
Maybe.
one of the things I had at this point is just questions about Art Babbitt himself. I mean, like I said, I learned a lot about him because there's no real book about him per se. He's usually a chapter at most in any other book. Here you
Not
go
even.
per
Not even.
yeah,
He's like
yeah,
a
yeah,
paragraph.
but I mean, it's never a book about him, so it's like this is the closest you're going to get. Like you were saying, originally it was
Yeah.
supposed to be Art Babbitt. Um, some of the things that uh, I found interesting because I
Yeah.
never knew exactly what he did, but I wrote down that he was protected, but then he got laid off, and then in May, maybe I have my dates wrong. He got laid off in May of 41, or that's when the strike was. And he got back in August, and then he's laid off again on November 24th. And
Yeah,
then
he was fired 3 times
okay,
from the
so
Disney
that's what it
studio.
is: May, August, and November. Okay, and
Yeah.
then he had a couple lawsuits.
Yes.
And he
He sued
lost.
Walt Disney twice.
He lost the civil suit, but what was the other suit? What was the other suit? I didn't get that. I was writing my notes. Or
Okay.
were they both civil suits?
No, no. What well, the civil suit was for the unpaid bonuses that he
Mhm.
felt were owed to him
Okay.
because their contracts, all the animators' contracts had
Mhm.
like a page or two about bonuses,
Mhm.
but there was no bonus schedule, there were no matrices about who would earn what and how much.
Right.
It was very, ethereal, and uh, it kind of gave management, and I say management, but I'm inferring Gunther Lessing, the vice president, who was the chief legal counsel, who's drawing up all the contracts.
Mhm.
It gave them freedom to give however much they wanted, whatever they felt would be best for the company. If they wanted to use these bonuses as an incentive, great. If they wanted to just take away bonuses unceremoniously, they could do that too.
Mm.
But when you're counting on bonuses because you're receiving them for 2 years, and then it just stops immediately after the most successful film of all time is made by your hands,
Mhm.
they stopped after Snow White.
Mhm.
It's going to make you mad, especially
Mhm.
when you do great work on Pinocchio and great work on Fantasia. Where are these bonuses
Mhm.
and these new contracts that they had? Just like you know, very simply omitted any pages about the bonuses.
Mhm.
So just as quickly as they came actually not quickly, but like over a course of very well thought out steps starting in 1935, this
Mhm.
bonus system. And
Mhm.
then they just stopped after Snow White.
Mhm.
And the animators were like, where, what, who? I thought Walt trusted us. We trusted him.
Mhm.
Um, and it created a lot of ill will, and they realized that, oh, Walt is trying to he's not one of us, he's his own, he's the captain, and he's going to treat himself as the captain of this ship.
Mhm.
It's not we'll all go down together or we'll all succeed together,
Mhm.
as it was, they all had that mentality, which is kind of fun. You think if we fail, we'll all go broke together, but they didn't. And instead of sharing the profits like he promised, he built a studio in
Mhm.
Burbank, and
Mhm.
he's like, I'm sharing it with you. And they're like, I can't put food on my table for my new family or put a mortgage on my house
Mhm.
with this stuff, Walt. Um,
Now that one he won, that suit he won, you're saying,
well,
or
no, he
or
lost that
oh,
suit.
you lost that suit too.
He lost
Okay.
that suit for the bonuses because it
Okay.
wasn't stipulated in the contract.
Oh, I get it. Okay. Yeah.
Um, and the evidence that the company brought up,
Mhm.
which had never been seen publicly before, were the statements that Pinocchio and Fantasia each lost $1 million.
Oh, because of the European market. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So the judge ruled that the company has no obligation to pay bonuses if they're in the red.
Mhm.
I guess they didn't think about this was 1941, so they didn't think about the home entertainment market or even the re-release market at that time.
Right. Right. Yeah.
But the suit that Babbitt won was his labor board suit. The National Labor
Oh,
Relations
okay. That's
Board
what it is. Okay.
sued Walt and the Disney company for unfair discrimination for
Mhm.
firing Art Babbitt.
Mhm.
And the company's argument is that Babbitt is not as good as he used to be. And it's a very fast. I put this entire court document, for the
Mhm.
most part, on my website for
Mhm.
anyone who wants to read it. The the courtroom testimony is over 8 days,
Mhm.
and Art Babbitt speaks for 2 days. And against him is Hal Adelquist, the head of personnel at the Disney company, and Walt Disney speaks, and every Disney director speaks against Art Babbitt, and then as witnesses for Art Babbitt speaking on his behalf, every Warner Brothers animator speaks for him.
Mhm.
We have Chuck Jones, Frank Tashlin,
Mhm.
Bob Clampett. Like they all come in one by one, and they all say, um, "He, we know that he's like one of the top craftsmen in the business."
Mhm.
And it's just a fascinating read. So if you go to the DisneyRevolt.com, you can
Okay.
access that yourself.
Okay.
So Babbitt won that suit,
Mhm.
that lawsuit, and as a result, the company was forced to hire him back.
Yeah.
And immediately afterwards, he joined the Marines in
Yeah.
World
That was
War
my next point
II.
that I didn't know anything about. I just thought he came back and that was it. I didn't realize there's this like
Yeah,
all these little in between details. Um, had he not done anything, um, do you think Art Babbitt would have become one of the nine old men?
yeah,
Okay,
yes,
okay,
yes, yes, yes,
yeah, okay.
yeah.
I always thought that myself, but I was just wanting to get your opinion on it. Yeah, so
I think he stands above the nine old men.
yeah,
The reason why those nine men are called the nine old men are because it was a joke that Walt Disney used to call these young men
hmm
the nine old men after the nine Supreme Court justices that Roosevelt disparagingly called nine old men who are too stuck in their ways to sign on to the New Deal.
right.
So there was one photo of these nine guys in the arts, and Walt's like, "Yeah, these are my nine old men." But there were so many other talented artists at
Oh yeah,
Disney, and
oh yeah,
that status, nine old men, made them instant living legends. But
yeah,
all of those nine guys stayed inside during the strike. Not one of them went out on strike. They were
yeah,
all loyal to Walt, and Walt valued loyalty above all else.
yeah.
He names
And
it in what's that?
I always felt that that's how that was a qualifier to make you a nine old man. He never went on strike.
That's yeah, yeah.
Even if it was never overtly expressed anywhere, it's just obvious. I mean, if there's like one person that may have struck, gone out on strike, and he still called him a nine old man, then you could say, well, it's like maybe he really is trying, being Walt, trying to pick the cream of the crop of the artist. But yeah, it's like from whatever I've read or heard about Art Babbitt, yeah, he was one of the top ones, one of the top animators of all time. So
Oh, he was the top. I'm
yeah,
telling you. And I'll
yeah,
give you, would you like to hear my reasons why he's
sure,
the
sure.
top? In our final moments of this interview, not only was he a supervising animator for the features,
Hmm.
like the Nine Old Men were, he was a supervising animator for main characters of the features, each of them, for Snow
Hmm.
White, Pinocchio, Fantasia, and Dumbo. In addition to that, he was the originator of one of the core characters of Goofy.
Hmm.
Just like Freddie Moore is called like the originator of Mickey, and Norm Ferguson for Pluto, and Dick Lundy became that for Donald. Um, Babbitt was that for Goofy. On top of that, it was Babbitt who brought in figure drawing classes so everyone could better their
Hmm.
drawing skills, and he brought in an art teacher
Hmm.
named Don Graham from Chenard, which is
Hmm.
now Cal Arts,
Hmm.
and that started a whole like in studio art school. Art Babbitt brought in method acting to characters. He wrote a treatise called The Character Analysis of the Goof, and he applied method acting to the characters. That became the key to personality animation that Walt was seeking for so long. Art Babbitt used his own movie camera to do live action reference for some characters, not rotoscoping, but reference. He wasn't asking people to
Hmm.
be traced. He was asking his friends to move in a certain way, and that would inform how the characters would move.
Right.
And that source of live action reference, he was the person to bring that into the studio, and that has been used in every animation studio worth its salt ever since.
Yep.
Stop motion, CG, hand drawn.
Yep.
So he did all of those things. He pushed animation further than any other animator at Disney Studio. He was in line with Walt. He
Hmm.
was entirely invested in the art form just as much as Walt, and he worked hard and he worked extra hours and he thought outside the box and he brought all these things to make everyone rise above where they were. And it was Babbitt who made the Disney Studio uh, the supreme studio in the world.
Hmm.
Um, so it's so bizarre how he and Walt, who were so in sync creatively,
Hmm.
became so bitterly ripped apart.
Right. But I get it. I mean, if you're passionate about something, you want it to do, in defense of art, I'm sure he was so passionate about it, he was willing to put his job and career on the line to better the whole, company and industry even. Yeah.
But he's such an interesting character, though.
Yeah.
He's such an
Yeah.
and I wanted to do like a character analysis of him. I wanted to
Yeah.
do to Art Babbitt what Art Babbitt did to Goofy and get
Hmm.
inside his head,
Yeah.
figure out why a guy who was earning he was like Jay Gatsby. He was living like a great Gatsby life.
Hmm.
He was young, earning tons of money, living large. Why he would why he would sacrifice that, or even threaten to
Yeah.
sacrifice that for for a union. It's a real Romeo and Juliet story where two people are like aligned.
Yeah.
Maybe not Romeo and Juliet. They didn't end up dying or in love with each other, but it was a Shakespearean tragedy, that's for
Yes,
sure.
I'll agree with that. But yeah, it's just, very headstrong, passionate people, here, and
Yes, headstrong.
Clash of
Yeah.
the Titans, as it were,
Clash of
you
the
know, and,
Titans.
and that's why I asked earlier, it's kind of surprising. Well, you did reveal that he did have one small studio doing TV commercials, but it's just surprising. Art Babbitt, maybe he knew better because of the Ub Iwerks situation, when Ub Iwerks was pulled away and he got his
Yeah.
own studio but struggled during that and then ended up coming back to Disney. Maybe he was all aware of that, but I don't know. I'm making up stuff, so who knows? Um, I guess Disney as a studio has kind of made amends. Didn't they honor him before he did pass away in 1992
Well,
uh,
um,
as a Disney legend and stuff like that? I
he earned
thought,
his Disney
yeah.
Legend Award posthumously after
Oh,
he
it's
died.
posthumous. Okay.
Yeah.
Oops.
So he died at so yeah, he died in 1992, but
Mm,
but uh but Roy E. Disney did send him a package of it was Fantasia when it was like re-released on video.
mhm,
And as his wife says, and witnesses who've seen this, along with it was a note that said, for someone, well, it was like for you, Art, um, for let's see, I can't remember quite what it said, but I wrote it in the book. But it was something very
okay.
sweet. Like Roy E. Disney really tried
Another reason
to,
to get the book.
yeah, yeah.
Anyway.
And Babbitt, he was on his deathbed at the time.
Mm,
He was hospitalized, and he held it, and he said, "It's so nice to be one of the guys again."
that's very cool.
Um, and also in 1987, Roy E. Disney invited Babbitt to a 50th anniversary of Snow White party
Mm,
where a bunch of other animators were. So it was Babbitt and a bunch of other non-strikers who were there.
mhm.
And feelings were still strong.
Yeah.
Feelings were still strong in 1987, which is,
Yeah.
crazy to think about. But these were people who did something incredible. They did the near impossible to make Snow White. And
Mhm,
I wanted to understand what that was like too. I myself was an animator for 10 years. I
mm,
wanted to put my experience into the experience of these animators. Like there's a certain understanding when you work in the field of like what the personalities are like, what the dynamics are like,
mhm.
what the hours are like,
Yeah.
that you don't really get doing anything else. So I had like an intimate understanding of what it's like to walk the halls of an animation studio,
Mhm,
and especially when you're making stuff for entertainment.
mhm,
And I wanted to take the reader by the hand during the first half of the book and walk them through the halls of Hyperion Avenue.
mhm.
And but I try not to overload the reader with details, but I say what color the wallpaper was, and I say like what sound you hear. You hear
Yeah.
the sound of the moviola clicking, clicking, clicking sounds like bacon frying. That's what the
Mhm,
artist said. It sounded like bacon frying.
mhm.
And maybe you're smelling cigarettes, and maybe you're seeing like tureens of tobacco juice on the floor, and and people are playing pranks on each other, and people are uh, kind of like grouping together into cohorts and into cliques, and people are some are the studious ones, and some are the wise guys, and some are the sporty guys, and some are the intellectuals. um, and everyone's having a great time because it's the 1930s. You are in your 20s, your boss is in his 30s, and you're basically everything you do is like a big fu to the movie going public. They're like, you can't do that, and you're like,
Yeah.
watch me make you fall in love with a drawing.
Pretty cool. Well, I really appreciate you being on the show. This kind of really explains a lot, and you know, I'm glad you wrote the book, because it really explains the situation. It's a little more uh important or in depth than I originally thought, which I'm sure there's other people like, oh, it's that's not that important. No, it was important, and it affects Disney animation to this day. So yeah.
Yeah.
At this point, I guess you can let people know if you're going to make any personal appearances anywhere to
Oh
promote the
yeah.
book, and then how to get in contact with you and how to buy the book and good stuff like that. So have the floor.
Okay, the juicy details. Well, you can go anywhere and buy the book. If it's in your bookstore, get it there. If it's not, ask for it. They can order it for you. If you go to the publisher's website, you can get a discount. Yeah, very nice. Look, you got a nice, beautiful hardcover binding and
It's
everything.
cutting off the
The
pictures, so that's why I put the
Yeah,
get Donald
thank
Duck.
you, thank you.
Anyway, go ahead.
Um, the so if you go to chicagoreviewpress.com
Mm,
and use the discount code Disney25, all of your listeners and viewers can get a 25% discount on the book for a limited time only.
mhm.
So that's a sweet deal. If anyone's going to be in San Francisco on February 18th. I don't know if you have any San Francisco listeners or fans out there. So
Well,
that's
I
going
mean,
to be
I used
okay.
to live there, but that was a while ago.
Great town.
Yeah.
Great town. That's the Saturday of President's Weekend. So I'm going to be at the San Francisco Cartoon Museum talking about the book, signing copies between 2 and 4,
Was
2
that the
p.m. and
Cartoon
4
Art
p.m.
Museum with Andrew Farago or a different museum?
Um, Andrew Farago. I don't know. Andrew Farago. I think there's only one cartoon museum in San Francisco, isn't
Well,
there?
there's a Cartoon Art Museum, and that's at Fisherman's Wharf now. They've moved. And
Yes, that's the
okay, so
one.
then that's who it is. Andrew Farrago is the curator. He's a friend of mine. So anyways,
Oh,
so
okay.
anyway, tell him say hi. Anyway,
Okay.
and then the other museum, which is Disney related, you've mentioned the Walt Disney Family
Oh,
Museum,
yeah.
which is also in
Yeah.
San Francisco. So
Oh, yeah. Fun museum to visit. I will not be speaking there though,
okay.
but fun museum. I give them so much credit for having a whole permanent exhibit on the strike.
Hmm.
The Walt Disney Family Museum has a whole corner on the second floor just about the strike.
Hmm.
So really special that they did that. They have a little bit about Walt's testimony at the House Un-American Activities Committee
Hmm.
following the strike. It really paints Walt Disney as a human figure. And that's what I tried to do, show him that he's a human who's acting and reacting from
Hmm.
the things of his time.
Hmm.
So if anyone wants to get in touch with me, you can find me at www.jakesfriedman.com, thedisneyrevolt.com. My socials are at Jake S. Friedman on the
Hmm.
Twitters and on the Instagrams.
Hmm. Very cool.
Yeah.
Um, Are you planning to go to like say any comic conventions or anything in the next few months or anything at this time, or you're just going month by
Oh,
month, you know? Because I know it's like I've interviewed people for the longest time, and it's like I'm not going anywhere with this pandemic. But you know, this year is like the year people are starting to go out and about again. So, any other appearances besides the museum or
there are a
coming?
couple small appearances here and there. Some, yeah, there's some in New York. But
Okay,
as far as big cons, I'll keep you up to date if you follow me on the socials.
there we go. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I want to thank you, Jake, for being my guest. It was a very informative book. I'm very happy that I did read it after, you know, not being initially sure or certain. And, you know, it is one of the best Disney books I've read. So it's like it is a keeper in
Wow.
my collection. You know, I'm very picky on certain Disney books. If it's very superficial or then you know I don't keep them. But you know, if it's something like I'm gonna return to this. This is a good reference. Then it stays on my shelf. So this one's a
Oh,
keeper. So anyway,
thank you. High praise.
all
Thank
right,
you, Mark.
all right. I thank you again, Jake, and that wraps up another episode of the Fun Ideas podcast. And we will see you next time.